Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be showing you how you can combine the G1000 synthetic vision display with some good looking out the window in order to make your landings much simpler from a sight picture perspective. Let's get started. Alright, we're just coming out of the traffic pattern now, slowing down, getting ready for a descent down to the ground, making everything look pretty good. This is when the puzzles start. What do I have to do with the plane in order to make sure that it's at the correct height relative to the ground as I start to make my approach? Now, this is one of those mysterious things where I will say the biggest thing that can help is experience. The second thing that can help is taking advantage of the fact that we've got a digital display that tells us what our glide slope is on it without actually knowing what our glide slope is. And I'll show you what I mean. All right, let's go ahead and square ourselves up there at the end of the runway. We're at Glen Falls here. This is George Floyd Memorial Airport. Kilo Golf Foxtrot Lima, and we're just about ready to go ahead and turn final here. Getting a little slow, but that was my intention so that I could show you the trick. All right, swinging left here. I'm going to have a little more power. We're getting a little sinky. That's perfectly fine for this plane. All right, now let me go ahead and get myself lined up, and I will go ahead and freeze time here. Excellent. Now, go ahead and think for a few seconds here before I reveal all my secrets. Can you tell if I'm too fast? Can you tell if I'm too slow? Can you tell if I'm too high? And can you tell if I'm too low? Sounds like the places you go. So let's go ahead and look out the window for a second here. What do you notice about the shape of our friend the runway here? One thing you'll notice, for example, is we're slightly off center, but that's okay for example. Do you notice the fact that the shape of this is basically a slightly off-kilter trapezoid? You'll notice this part of the runway, it'll come this part here and this part here, is a little bit wider than this part here and this part here. That's awesome news, because that means that if the base of this starts going this way and the tip of this starts going further away, that means we are going to be shifting our position. We're actually going to be getting lower. If we notice that this part of the runway, or really the runway becomes more rectangular, that means that we are starting to get too high. Now let me zoom back out to my original seating position, so to speak here. I'm going to head now set back up here. Now, one of the things we should be doing is we should always be picking a point on the runway that acts as our target. Now, what you'll observe here is my target that I always like to use is completely invisible. That means you're going too slow. So let me go ahead and unpause here and go ahead and jam on the throttle for a few moments here, build up a little bit of airspeed. And then I'm just going to build up some airspeed, just going to build up some airspeed, just going to build up some airspeed. You can see we got a pretty substantial crosswind today. Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and pause here. Excellent. Now, can you see where we need to look on the runway for our target point? Now, when they talk about landings, a lot of people talk about the touchdown markers, which are going to be these large white box. I like to call them the 1,000 footers. This is the typical target if you are a very, very heavy airliner. But for us in general aviation land with small planes, our target is actually not this point. Our target is at this point, at the 500-foot point. Now, I'm going to go ahead and zoom my head back out again. Now, where do you notice that the target is relative to the dashboard on the aircraft? Now, if you're looking at the news real quick, you'll probably see that it is just about a couple inches over the position of that. Now, if that particular target that we're aiming for remains in exactly the same position as we start to come down, and the shape of the runway does not change, that means we are going to hit that target. So let me go ahead and unpause real quickly here. Now, what do you notice? Do you see how the runway is starting to get a little bit more rectangular? That means we're going too fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the power. Let me go ahead and pause for a second here. And again, I'm keeping this point on the runway the same distance from my dashboard during the entire approach here. All right, I notice that it's at the same position, but the runway is starting to change shape again. I'm noticing that the base of the runway is starting to get wider. So I'm going to go ahead and push my throttle forward a little bit here. Now, what do you notice? Do you see the base of the runway getting wider, or do you see the end of the runway getting wider? Now, again, that point on the runway is still at exactly the same spot on the ground. Now, do you see how it's starting to slip again? Keeping it at the same spot, keeping it at the same spot, keeping it at the same spot. Throttle comes back, nose comes up, and we hit the exact point on the ground that we were staring at the entire time. Now, what you probably have observed there is it felt like we were coming in really, really steep, but what you probably also noticed is we hit the exact point on the ground we were looking, along with having that nice smooth transition to a landing with that nice power down that we had here. Let's make this a little bit more tricky. Here we are, lovely Hartford, Connecticut. Now, we now have something that's going to make things more complicated for us. And this is one of the things I love about aviation, is the little details that people miss. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Do you notice the PAPI on the left side of the runway? Do you notice the fact that it is not aligned with the touchdown point on the runway? Now you'll notice as I'm sinking here, and I'm sinking very aggressively, intentionally to demonstrate my purpose here, that those white lights are going to start mysteriously shifting to white, red, and then it's going to become 2 whites, 2 reds, then it's going to slowly change. There's 1 red, and here comes the next red. Perfect. Let me pause right here. Now let's take a look out the window and see what's going on. So I notice here that my targeting point, which conveniently is going to be basically between the threshold of the runway and the 1,000 footer, kind of the second line right here, I notice the fact that it's a little bit further away from my dashboard than it was in my previous landing. The other thing I'm probably going to start noticing is the end of this runway here is going to start getting real wide on me. So I'm not going to pay any attention to my airspeed, but what I am going to do is I'm simply going to keep that target point right back on my runway one more time, and I'm just going to play with my throttle and look at the shape of the runway. If the shape of the runway starts shifting one way or the other, I'm just going to adjust my throttle. So again, locking that point at the same point in the horizon. I'm not paying attention to my airspeed at all. I could shut that screen off right now and it wouldn't matter. Again, I've just got that point alone. Let me go ahead and pause for a second. Now, if I look here, I have got this spot so glued into my brain right now, and all I'm doing is watching the shape of the runway, trying to get wider or thinner, that I didn't even notice the fact that I am still correctly on my glide path. I've still got 2 reds and 2 whites. That's something I don't even need to pay attention to. And likewise, I'm not fiddling with my throttle very much. All right, keeping it at the same point. I'm getting high, so I'm going to reduce my throttle a little bit. There we go. You can see we're right back on. Okay, runway's made. I'm going to go ahead and reduce my power. Nose up. And you can see that we went long compared to the position that we wanted to do originally. Now you're sitting here going, well, you had the thing at the right spot. I mean, you were about 3 or 4 knots faster than you were the first time. What made the difference? I'll show you what made the difference. Let's back up a little bit here. Do you notice that we're about to smack into the ground? No, but this will make my point very clearly. Did you notice when we were coming in for our landing here, if I can get my airspeed up long enough, oh my goodness. Just relax. Okay, hang on a second. The fact that this runway doesn't use a standard glide path. As a matter of fact, it uses quite a bit greater than 3 degrees. It's about a 3.5 degree glide path, which means if we're following the lights on the side of the runway perfectly, we're actually coming in almost a 0.5 degree steeper than anything else we've ever done before, which means we're actually going to be coming in too high and slightly fast for our usual target. So what I did this time, and I made it a little bit different, is I used my PAPI indicator to basically get me close to the runway so I don't hit trees, but then I changed my target from this point to this point. Now watch what happens if I use the big old number 2 at the end of the runway. Again, same technique here. Keep it at the same spot, throttle to 0, transition. And there's that point. Now, isn't that incredible that that slight change of glide path angle makes that much of a difference to the actual landing point that your aircraft is going to come down with the ground? So the key thing that you want to take away here is you need to know the particular nose point that your aircraft has to be relative to the target. Once you keep it there, it's simply a matter of keeping the runway the same basic shape while keeping that exact point at the same point on your actual dashboard. Now, what happens when you're not completely sure what your particular angle is supposed to be? Now, if you remember at the beginning of the video, I had mentioned the fact that you can use your G1000 synthetic vision to help out with this. So we're going to do it. So one of the things you'll probably notice on my G1000, let me freeze for a second here, is the fact that there is a bar here that tells you your current angle. For example, I can tell you the end of the runway right now is about 7.5 degrees below my horizon. How do I know? Well, this is 5 degrees, that's 10 degrees, and this is about half. The other thing I can tell you is this little flight path vector, the little circle with wings, is currently aiming me into the Connecticut River. What were to happen if I were to put the flight path vector on my target point and get my aircraft so that it's at 3 degrees? You put that together immediately. Yes, exactly. That would mean we're perfectly on glide path, and that would also mean we are perfectly lined up to hit the particular target. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at my synthetic vision here, and I'm going to go ahead and push my nose down here. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the end of the runway to sit below 5 degrees. See how it's just about below 5 degrees? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift my nose up. I'm going to start bringing in some throttle before we start getting real slow here. And I'm simply going to place my flight path vector right on my numeral target, as well as keeping the horizon at my 3 degrees. Now it's going to require a little bit of fancy throttle work here to get this to work. There we go. So you can see I've got about a 3-degree descent, and you can also see that my flight path vector is perfectly at the end of the runway. I'm just going to add a little bit of throttle if I feel like I'm getting a little bit low. It's a little bit low. Add a little bit more throttle, add a little bit more throttle, and you can still see that that stays at the same point at the end of the runway. Now let me go ahead and pause. Take a look out the window. Did you notice the fact that this aircraft is way, 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 way below the PAPI indicator? That is because if you look here at the comparison between the synthetic vision and that, we are targeting the end of the runway to be a 3-degree glide path, when this line here is where that 3-degree glide path was originally intended. So the reason we've done all that, and you'll see that in a few moments, is if I continue my little descent here, you will notice that the end of the runway has become my effective target. And when I actually go to transition to my landing situation, you will notice the fact that we land very, very, very close to the end of the runway if that was something that we were targeting. So that is the second point I wanted to make, is that when you do pick that point, keep in mind that point will shift, but not change the angle you'll come down to the ground. Enjoy.